themselves coming out of these arguments, it really does seem that the justices are quite divided on this issue of nationwide injunctions.
So, Zach, you shared that courtroom with my 16-year-old son, who randomly happened to be there, and his readout was slightly less nuanced than yours. He said, it was good, but very complicated. So, I mean, that's a lot. I don't usually get that much out of him. He was confused by a lot of what you talked about, that this wasn't specifically about birthright citizenship, right? This was about injunction power. But obviously, the birthright citizenship debate was sort of looming over it. Do we have any sense on if the justices do decide to rule on that, how they would rule? I know you're reading the tea leaves a little bit, but what was your sense of that?
It seems like there were pretty ominous signs for the future of that executive order. The liberal justices, I mean, pretty much put their cards on the table, and we're talking about how they believe this is unconstitutional. There was a point where Justice Sonia Sotomayor pretty plainly said she believes it violates a Supreme Court precedent. So it seems that the Trump administration, on the merits of this, it might not be able to convince any of the liberal justices. And what I was really struck by is the conservative justices. They really didn't put their cards on the table, but they didn't push back. There was no justice during this argument who spoke up to defend the constitutionality of Trump's executive order. Oftentimes, when we get into these contentious issues, if the liberal justices come out forcefully one way, but the conservatives are on the other side, you'll see them kind of try to drive the conversation back to their point of view. But as the liberal justices were coming out and criticizing the order, we saw none of the 6 conservatives really speak up. So although this question is not directly before the Supreme Court, and we might not get a sense at this stage of the case, it seems like pretty ominous signs as this case moves forward.
Zach Schoenfeld, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, really interesting arguments we heard yesterday, and I agree that there were a lot of people confused about, is this about birthright citizenship or nationwide injunctions or both? But I do think that there have been a little bit of arguments in the Supreme Court recently that maybe tell us a little bit more about where the conservative justices are leaning on this issue, and particularly in terms of lower court judges in regards to the Alien Enemies Act ruling that allowed Trump to use that recently. The judge in that case out of Pennsylvania essentially referred to the analogy to pirates in terms of comparing illegal aliens to pirates. So basically extrajudicious, not necessarily members of a nation who would invade a country. And that is a similar argument that the Trump administration has been using in regards to birthright citizenship, which is that illegal aliens are like pirates. They invade a country, even if they're not doing it directly at the behest of some government. And that's why their children would be exempt from getting citizenship that way.
And I think, too, I think it's really important. Remember, Donald Trump didn't sign the birthright citizenship executive order on day one and think, okay, well, that'll just go into place, right? I mean, he knew, obviously his legal team knew, this was aimed at prompting a legal fight.
Yes.
Right? Unlike some of the things he signed, they knew that this was going to be challenged because of the 14th Amendment, right? So I always point to people, Donald Trump said he was so happy, quoted, so happy when the justices agreed to take this up, which, as Zach said, this is not exactly birthright citizenship available to people who are everyone born in this country or not. This is a little bit of a technicality, but again, I think it's to Amber, to your point. It's the Trump administration is trying to engage in these conversations at the legal level in hopes that they get some guidance. Yes, guidance that is favorable to them, but guidance on some of the stuff that is very gray area and hasn't really been challenged. So it's sort of a victory even that the Supreme Court heard these oral arguments and we're talking about these oral arguments for Donald Trump's sort of broader legal strategy.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, because I think it was in the week after the EO was issued that the DOJ called in reporters for a background briefing.
Right.
And I was there, and they were talking about this exact issue, which is we don't know whether or not we're going to prevail in the Supreme Court. We don't even know if the Supreme Court is going to take this up. But we hope that they do, because then finally we'll have settled this question once and for all. And we can have clarity as to whether or not we need to move forward through a process to actually amend the Constitution.
And I will note, I think, and again, so much of this stuff, for anyone who's ever covered the Supreme Court, it's so hard. None of them come out and say well, we're not going to do that, right? It's all you're reading what they say. But I do think if I am in the Trump administration, I am not thrilled at the role Amy Coney Barrett played yesterday, where she sort of jumps in as the liberals are questioning the Solicitor General. She kind of jumps in and says, Well, so are you guys going to listen if there are court rulings about anything? Because again, we are looking at, yes, it's a 6-3 majority, but John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett are sort of swing votes on a lot of these things, these big issues. So if you're reading the 50,000-foot view, I would say that makes me think Amy Coney Barrett may not be sort of on our team as much as you would like going forward, because obviously the Supreme Court has a gigantic role to play in the next couple of years of the Trump.
And there's already been a lot of consternation among conservatives about Roberts and Coney Barrett, and the Supreme Court more generally about how long it's taken them to address this nationwide injunction issue. They've been frustrated by the Supreme Court not stepping in on the issue of forum shopping. With one of those early Alien Enemies Act cases, it was plaintiffs from Texas filing in D.C., and the Trump administration really wanted the Supreme Court to say, no, actually, you can't do that. You have to go to a Texas judge. And the Supreme Court kind of washed its hands of the whole thing for the first 3 months of the administration, which kind of left a lot of things sort of blowing in the wind.
I feel like the legal process is the only thing that moves slower than the political process. Like, it is it just does not, it never moves on the timeline that you want. It's like counting votes in California.
All right, next up, Senator Ron Johnson is not happy with the so-called big, beautiful bill Republicans are trying to push through Congress. That's next.